A Hell's Angel noticed bruises around his waitress's eyes. Then he learned the truth about her abusive husband. The peaceful morning air was brutally cut by the deep growl of a Harley-Davidson. Jack the Bear Turner guided his bike into May's diner lot, his weathered boots crunching on the gravel. 62 years old, 20 of them, spent trying to live quiet. His old life was still written in the faded tattoos, and the way his eyes constantly scanned the nearly empty parking lot and both exits. The bell above the diner door chimed. The scent of coffee and bacon wrapped around him as he settled into his corner booth, the vinyl sighing under his massive frame. Maggie Walker appeared, coffee pot in hand. "Morning, Jack," she said, her usual warmth strained. Her hand trembled slightly as she poured his coffee. As she leaned forward, her carefully arranged hair shifted. Jack's jaw tightened. Below the edge of her hair was the telltale shadow of bruising along her neck. When she straightened, the harsh fluorescent lights caught her face, revealing more bruising around her eyes, badly concealed by makeup. Something cold and familiar stirred in Jack's chest, the same feeling he got when trouble was brewing. His calloused hands tensed imperceptibly around the warm mug. 20 years of looking the other way suddenly evaporated. "You want your usual?" Maggie asked, her pen poised, that forced smile still in place. Jack nodded slowly, watching as she turned away. He noticed how she kept her head slightly down, how her movements were careful, as if protecting injured ribs. The weight of recognition settled heavy in his stomach. Maggie was hiding pain. Jack had seen enough abuse to know the signs. The quiet life he'd built felt less important than the woman trying to hide her damage behind a waitress's smile. The morning rush was picking up. Maggie darted between tables, a bird with an injured wing trying to fly normally. Jack wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, his eyes locked on her strained movements. The quiet was over. The biker code of protection was about to replace the code of silence. He was done watching. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the smell of bacon and pancakes filled the air. The usual morning crowd filtered in. Truckers stopping for breakfast, locals grabbing their daily cup of joe. But Jack barely noticed them. His attention stayed fixed on Maggie's trembling hands as she balanced plates and refilled coffee cups. "More coffee, Jack?" Maggie's voice wavered slightly as she approached his table. Her smile seemed stretched too thin across her face, like a mask about to crack. "Thanks." He held out his cup, studying her closely. The way she poured showed the tremor in her hands even more clearly. Coffee splashed slightly over the rim, and she quickly grabbed a napkin to wipe it up. She mumbled, her movements becoming more rushed. "My hands are a bit shaky today. Didn't sleep well last night." Jack nodded slowly, not pressing her. "No worries, Maggie. Happens to all of us." Throughout the next hour, he nursed his coffee and picked at his breakfast, watching as Maggie continued her rounds. Every time she reached above shoulder height to grab something from the shelves, she winced slightly. When she thought no one was looking, her forced smile would drop, revealing a flash of pain in her eyes. The morning light streaming through the windows grew stronger, and with it, Jack could see more clearly what Maggie was trying to hide. Makeup had been carefully applied, but it couldn't completely conceal the dark shadows around her eyes. Not bruises from lack of sleep. These were different. Jack had seen enough fights in his past to recognize the signs of violence. The diner slowly emptied as the morning rush ended, leaving just a few regulars scattered around the counter. Jack remained in his booth, ordering another coffee whenever Maggie passed by. Each time she approached, he noticed something new. The way she favored her right side, how she kept her head slightly down, avoiding direct eye contact. Finally, Jack stood up, leaving his usual generous tip on the table. As he made his way to the register, Maggie turned toward him, and for a brief moment, the overhead light caught her face at just the right angle. Without her constant movement, he could see it clearly now. the purple-yellow marks around her eyes, partially hidden beneath carefully applied concealer. Their eyes met for a split second, and he saw something there that made his stomach clench. Fear, mixed with shame and resignation. Maggie quickly looked away, busying herself with the register. Her fingers trembled as she counted out his change. "Have a good day, Jack," she said softly, still not meeting his eyes. Jack wanted to say something, to ask if she needed help, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he just nodded, turned, and walked toward the door. The bell jingled as he stepped outside, but the cheerful sound felt wrong against the heaviness in his chest. He knew what those bruises meant. He'd seen enough of them in his past life to recognize the signs of someone living in fear. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the diner's parking lot as Jack's Harley rumbled to a stop. He'd spent hours wrestling with what he'd seen that morning, the bruises on Maggie's neck, the way her hands trembled as she poured coffee. Those weren't accidents. He knew the signs too well. Inside, the diner buzzed with the typical dinner crowd. The clinking of silverware and murmur of conversations filled the air, along with the sizzle of burgers on the grill. Jack chose a different booth this time, one with a clear view of the counter where Maggie worked. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, but Jack noticed how she winced when reaching for the coffee pot. The makeup around her eyes had worn thin after hours of work, revealing darker patches of purple beneath. His jaw clenched at the sight. The old Jack, the one who'd worn the Hells Angels patch, would have already tracked down whoever hurt her and dealt out his own justice. But he wasn't that man anymore. He'd learned the hard way that rushing in with fists flying usually made things worse, especially in situations like this. Still, watching Maggie hurry past with her forced smile made his hands curl into fists under the table. She'd been serving him coffee for months now, always kind, always with a gentle word. The thought of someone hurting her made his blood boil. A teenage couple occupied the booth next to him, sharing a chocolate shake and giggling. Their innocent happiness felt out of place against the darkness of what he suspected was happening to Maggie. Jack ordered his usual burger and coffee, more to maintain his cover than from any real hunger. He watched as Maggie handled a difficult customer with grace, apologizing for a mixed-up order even though Jack had heard the man clearly change his mind twice. Her patience amazed him, especially knowing what she was going through at home. Because that's where the bruises came from. He was sure of it now. The way she startled at sudden movements, how she kept checking the time as her shift drew to a close. All the signs pointed to an abusive home situation. The dinner rush gradually thinned out. Families paid their bills and headed home, leaving behind empty plates and generous tips for Maggie's attentive service. The teenage couple finally left, and the diner grew quiet except for the low hum of the overhead fans and the occasional clink of dishes being washed in the kitchen. Jack waited, nursing his third cup of coffee. He needed to approach this carefully. One wrong move could make her shut down completely, maybe even quit her job to avoid him. He'd seen that happen before. Victims sometimes ran from help because facing the truth was too painful. Finally, Maggie stood alone at the counter, organizing receipts from the evening rush. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, and she reached up to rub her neck, quickly dropping her hand when the movement caused her pain. This was his moment. Jack stood slowly, his boots quiet on the linoleum floor as he approached the counter. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from concern for what his next words might unleash. He'd started down this road now, and there was no turning back. He leaned in slightly, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Maggie, what's going on with you? I saw the bruises." Maggie's hand trembled as she clutched her serving tray tighter against her chest. Her eyes darted around the nearly empty diner, checking if anyone else could hear them. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her face that made the bruises even more apparent. "It's nothing," she whispered, trying to step back. I bumped into a cabinet door. Jack's weathered face remained steady, his eyes fixed on hers with quiet intensity. Maggie, I've seen enough bruises in my life to know the difference between an accident and— He paused, his voice softening. And something else. Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes. She glanced toward the kitchen where the cook was busy cleaning up, then back at Jack. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible. "I can't talk about this here." "Then where?" Jack asked. He didn't move, didn't pressure her, just waited with the patience of someone who understood the weight of silence. Maggie wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand. "My shift ends in 20 minutes. There's a bench behind the diner, near the dumpsters. Nobody goes there this time of night." Jack nodded once and returned to his booth. He nursed his coffee, watching as Maggie finished her duties with mechanical precision, her movements stiff and guarded. 20 minutes later, they sat on the metal bench behind the diner. The evening air was cool, and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic from the highway. Maggie's hands were folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "His name is Greg," she finally said, staring at the ground. "My husband. We've been married for 32 years. Her voice cracked slightly. "It wasn't always like this. In the beginning, he was different. But then he started drinking more, lost his job, and the anger." She wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Jack's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "The first time he hit me," he cried afterward, "promised it would never happen again." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "That was 15 years ago. Now he doesn't even bother with promises anymore." "Why don't you leave?" Jack asked quietly, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Where would I go?" Maggie's voice was hollow. "He controls everything. The money, the house, my phone. He checks the mileage on my car every day. And—" she took a shuddering breath. "He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd find me. Said he'd hurt my kids." Jack's fists tightened until his knuckles turned white. He'd seen this before. Good people, trapped in living nightmares, their spirits crushed by someone who was supposed to love them. "Yesterday," Maggie continued, her voice dropping even lower, "I dropped a plate while doing dishes. Her hand unconsciously touched the bruises around her eyes. "He said I was worthless, stupid, that nobody would ever want me." Tears rolled down her cheeks now. "Sometimes I think he's right." "He's not," Jack said firmly, his voice rough with emotion. "None of this is your fault, Maggie. Not one bit of it." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and the pain in her eyes made his heart ache. "I don't know what to do anymore," she admitted. "I'm so tired of being afraid." Jack's hands gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. The diner had emptied out, leaving just him and Maggie in the fluorescent-lit space. The coffee pot gurgled in the background as Maggie wiped down tables with shaking hands. "You can't stay with him," Jack said, his voice low and firm. "This isn't going to get better." Maggie paused her cleaning, clutching the rag tightly. "You don't understand, Jack. It's not that simple." "Then help me understand." Jack pulled out a chair at the nearest table, gesturing for her to sit. After a moment's hesitation, she did. "I've thought about leaving so many times," Maggie admitted, her eyes fixed on her hands in her lap. "I've even packed bags, hidden them in the garage. But Greg," she took a shaky breath, "he knows people, bad people, and he's made it clear what would happen if I tried to leave." Jack leaned forward, his expression serious. "I can help you, Maggie. I know people too, good people who can keep you safe." "You don't know Greg like I do," Maggie whispered. "When he drinks, he becomes someone else entirely, someone cruel and calculating." She touched her bruised neck absently. "He's threatened my children, Jack. Said he'd find them, no matter where they are." Jack's jaw clenched. He'd seen this before, the way abusers used threats against loved ones to maintain control. "Your kids, where are they now?" "My daughter's in college in Oregon. My son's working in Seattle." Maggie's voice softened with pride, despite her fear. "They made it out. They don't know how bad things have gotten." "Then let me help you get out, too," Jack urged. "I can arrange everything. A safe place, protection, whatever you need." Maggie stood up suddenly, resuming her cleaning with nervous energy. "I have a plan," she said quickly. "Just a few more weeks. I've been saving money, little by little. Once I have enough." "A few more weeks could be too long," Jack interrupted, standing as well. "What happens the next time he drinks?" Tears welled in Maggie's eyes. "You think I don't know that? But if something happened to my kids because I left—" She shook her head. "I couldn't live with myself." Jack watched her move around the diner, her movements quick and anxious. He recognized the signs of someone trapped by fear. He'd seen it countless times in his past life. But this was different. This wasn't just about getting Maggie away from Greg. It was about ensuring her children's safety, too. "Are you ready to leave?" he asked directly. "Really ready? Because if you are, I swear I'll help you do it right." Maggie stopped moving, her back to him. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. When she finally turned around, her face was etched with worry. "I want to," she whispered. "God, I want to so badly." "But Greg," he said, "if I ever left, he'd—" Her voice broke. "He'd hurt them, Jack. He described exactly what he'd do to them. And I know he meant every word." Jack felt his frustration rising, not at Maggie, but at the situation, at Greg, at the way fear could chain someone so completely. He understood now why she stayed. Her children's safety meant more to her than her own. But watching her suffer day after day, knowing what waited for her at home, made his blood boil. "Just give me a few more weeks," Maggie pleaded. "Please. I need to make sure they're safe first." The rumble of Jack's Harley died as he cut the engine in the diner's parking lot. His headlight beam swept across a beat-up blue pickup truck that made his jaw clench. Greg's truck. The sight of it sparked something dark inside him, a reminder of his own violent past that he'd tried so hard to leave behind. The diner's neon sign buzzed weakly against the night sky, casting alternating red and blue shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. Jack's boots crunched on loose gravel as he made his way to the entrance, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years watching his back. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making the worn linoleum floor shine with an artificial gleam. Only 3 customers occupied the booths: a tired-looking trucker nursing a coffee, an elderly couple sharing a slice of pie. But it was Maggie who caught his attention immediately. She moved between tables with quick, nervous steps, her shoulders tense. Her hands trembled slightly as she filled coffee cups, and she kept glancing toward the windows. Jack slid into his usual booth, positioning himself where he could see both the entrance and the kitchen doors. "Evening, Jack," Maggie said, approaching his table. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and dark circles under her eyes told him she hadn't been sleeping well. "The usual? Just coffee tonight, Maggie?" He studied her face carefully. Fresh bruises peeked out from beneath carefully applied makeup around her left eye. His fingers tightened around the menu until his knuckles turned white. As Maggie poured his coffee, her eyes darted to the window again. Jack followed her gaze but saw nothing except darkness and the reflection of the diner's lights. Still, something about her behavior set off warning bells in his mind. She wasn't just nervous, she was terrified. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. "Fine," she replied too quickly, the coffee pot shaking in her hand. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. Jack could feel it in his bones, that sixth sense developed from years of reading dangerous situations. He watched as Maggie hurried to the window again, peering out into the darkness. Her face went pale, and she practically ran back behind the counter, busying herself with reorganizing sugar packets that didn't need organizing. Jack maintained his casual posture, but his muscles were coiled tight, ready for action. He'd seen this kind of fear before, the kind that came from knowing someone was watching, waiting. Greg's truck outside wasn't just parked there by coincidence. Through the window's reflection, Jack caught glimpses of movement in the stale-ass, shadows across the street. He couldn't make out a clear figure, but he didn't need to. The way Maggie's hands shook as she worked told him everything he needed to know. He sipped his coffee slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unhurried. To anyone watching, he was just another customer enjoying a late-night cup of coffee. But his eyes never stopped moving, tracking every shadow, every movement. The weight of his past pressed heavy on his shoulders. He'd sworn off violence when he left the Angels, but watching Maggie tremble behind the counter made him question that decision. Maggie made another nervous trip to the window, then quickly retreated to the kitchen, her steps hurried and uneven. The air in the diner felt thick with tension, like the calm before a storm. Jack remained still, a quiet guardian in his corner booth, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, Greg was watching. Jack's jaw tightened as he watched Greg stumble out of the diner's front door. Even from this distance, the stench of alcohol seemed to radiate off him. Greg's heavy boots scuffed against the pavement as he swayed, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Maggie, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Where you think you're going?" Greg slurred, taking another unsteady step forward. His face was red and puffy, twisted into an ugly scowl. "We ain't done talking." Maggie's hands gripped the door frame, her knuckles white. "Greg, please. I have to finish my shift." "The hell you do!" Greg's voice rose, echoing across the empty parking lot. He jabbed a finger in her direction. "You been avoiding me all night. Think I didn't notice?" Jack's muscles tensed as he watched the scene unfold. He'd seen this type of situation too many times before. Knew exactly how it could spiral out of control. His eyes darted between Greg's clenched fists and Maggie's terrified expression. Greg took another stumbling step toward the door. "Get your things. We're going home. Now." "I can't just leave," Maggie protested, weakly, her voice trembling. "Sally's not here yet to take over." "I don't give a damn about Sally," Greg roared, causing Maggie to flinch. "You're my wife, and you'll do what I say." That was enough. Jack moved silently from his position in the shadows, his heavy boots making no sound on the asphalt. In 3 long strides, he positioned himself between Greg and the diner's entrance, his broad shoulders blocking Greg's path to Maggie. "Evening," Jack said, his voice low and steady. His eyes, hard as steel, locked onto Greg's face. "Think you've had enough for tonight?" Greg's bloodshot eyes widened in surprise before narrowing with anger. "Who the hell are you supposed to be? Someone who thinks you should turn around and walk away?" Jack's words carried no hint of threat. They didn't need to. The quiet authority in his voice said everything. Greg swayed on his feet, trying to draw himself up to his full height. "This ain't none of your business, old man. That's my wife in there. Being your wife doesn't make her your property." Jack didn't raise his voice, but each word carried the weight of granite. "Stay away from her." A cruel smile twisted Greg's lips. "Or what? You gonna stop me?" He leaned in closer, his alcohol-soaked breath hitting Jack's face. "I know who you are, seen you hanging around here. Think you're some kind of hero? Mind your own damn business before you get hurt." Behind them, Maggie watched through the glass door, her face a mask of terror and relief. Other customers inside the diner had gathered near the windows, drawn by the confrontation unfolding in the parking lot. The 2 men stood toe to toe, neither willing to back down, Jack remained motionless, a solid wall between Greg and his target. His silence seemed to unnerve Greg more than any words could have. Finally, Greg spat on the ground near Jack's boots. "This ain't over," he snarled, taking an unsteady step backward. "You can't be here all the time." He turned and stumbled toward his truck, nearly losing his balance twice before yanking open the driver's door. Jack watched as Greg's truck roared to life and peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing against the asphalt. He remained standing guard until the red taillights disappeared into the darkness. The morning sun filtered through the diner's dusty windows as Jack sat in his usual corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee. His weathered hands wrapped around the warm mug while he waited for Maggie's shift to start. The early breakfast crowd had thinned out, leaving only a few regulars scattered throughout the restaurant. When Maggie emerged from the kitchen, Jack caught her eye and gave a slight nod. She understood his silent signal and made her way over, coffee pot in hand. "Can you take a break?" Jack asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." Maggie glanced around nervously before nodding. "Give me 5 minutes." True to her word, she returned shortly after, sliding into the booth across from Jack. Her hands fidgeted with her apron, and dark circles under her eyes revealed another sleepless night. "I've got it all figured out," Jack said, leaning forward. "There's a place about 2 hours from here, a friend's cabin. It's isolated, peaceful. You'll be safe there while we sort things out." Maggie's eyes widened. "A cabin? It's better than you're thinking," Jack assured her. "It's got everything you need: electricity, running water, phone line. My friend uses it as a vacation home, but it's empty most of the time." "I don't know, Jack." Maggie's voice trembled. "I can't just leave. I need money first. I've been saving, but—" "Money?" Jack interrupted, his frustration seeping into his voice. "Maggie, I can help with that. What you need is to get out now, before—" "You don't understand," she cut in, wringing her hands. "I need enough to start over completely. Rent, deposits, food." Her voice dropped even lower. "What if he finds me? I need to be able to keep running if I have to." Jack ran a hand through his gray hair. "Listen to me. Every day you stay is another day. Something could go wrong. After what happened in the parking lot, Greg's not going to just let this go. He knows someone's watching now." Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes. "I'm trying to be smart about this. I can't just rush into it. Give me a few more weeks. That's all I'm asking. I'm almost there with my savings." "A few more weeks?" Jack's voice was gruff with concern. "That's too long, Maggie. Way too long. Greg's dangerous, and now he's angry. That's not a good combination." "I know what he's capable of better than anyone," Maggie whispered, wiping at her eyes with the corner of her apron. "That's why I have to be careful." Jack leaned back, studying her face. The bruises from before were fading, but the fear in her eyes was as fresh as ever. "I get that you're scared, but I promise you, I'll help however I can. Money, transportation, whatever you need. Just don't wait too long." "I just need a little more time," Maggie insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "Please understand." Jack nodded slowly, but his jaw was set in a hard line. "I'll be here, every day, watching. The moment you're ready, even if it's the middle of the night, you call me. I mean it, Maggie. Any time." Maggie stood up, straightening her apron with trembling hands. "I should get back to work. Thank you, Jack, for everything." As she walked away, Jack watched her go, his coffee now cold and forgotten. He knew time wasn't on their side, but he couldn't force her to leave. All he could do was wait and watch, ready to act the moment she gave the word. The roar of Jack's Harley had become a familiar sound in Maggie's neighborhood, though she rarely saw him these days. He kept his distance, parking blocks away and melting into the shadows like a protective ghost. His weathered face remained hidden beneath the brim of his leather cap as he watched over her house, her workplace, and everywhere in between. The summer heat pressed down on him as he sat in his usual spot, a small coffee shop across from the diner. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed. His eyes never left the diner's entrance, watching Maggie move between tables with that same forced smile she always wore. Each day, the routine was the same. He'd follow her home from work, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice, but close enough to step in if needed. The weight of his past hung heavy on his shoulders during these long watches. He'd seen too many people hurt, too many lives destroyed by violence. Some of that violence had come from his own hands, back in his Hell's Angels days. Never again, he muttered to himself, adjusting his position on the motorcycle seat. After 3 days of watching, Jack noticed Greg's truck wasn't in the driveway when Maggie got home. His gut twisted. Greg breaking routine usually meant trouble. Jack circled the block twice before settling into his observation point, a small alley between two houses. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when he heard it. The unmistakable sound of tires screeching around a corner. Greg's beaten-up pickup truck came into view, weaving erratically down the street. Jack's muscles tensed as he watched Greg slam on the brakes, the truck lurching to a stop at an angle across the driveway. Greg stumbled out of the driver's seat, nearly falling face first onto the pavement. Even from this distance, Jack could smell the whiskey on him. Greg's shirt was untucked, stained, and his face was twisted with anger as he staggered toward the porch. "Maggie!" Greg's voice boomed through the quiet neighborhood. "Get out here!" Jack's fists clenched automatically, his knuckles white with tension. Every fiber of his being wanted to storm over there and put Greg down hard. But he knew that wasn't the answer. Not yet. Violence would only make things worse for Maggie right now. Inside the house, lights flicked on one by one. Jack could see Maggie's silhouette through the curtains, moving cautiously. Greg continued his drunken approach to the porch, swaying with each step. "I know you're in there," Greg shouted, his words slurring together. "Open this door right now." Jack shifted his weight, ready to move. His heart pounded in his chest. Not from fear, but from the effort of holding himself back. He'd seen this scene play out too many times before. With his own mother, with countless others he couldn't save. The memories of those failures burned in his mind, fueling his determination to protect Maggie. Greg reached the porch steps, stumbling on the first one. He caught himself on the railing, then pulled himself up with unsteady movements. His face was red with alcohol and rage as he raised his fist to pound on the door. Jack tensed, knowing this could be the moment everything exploded. His hand unconsciously moved to the knife in his boot, an old habit from his past life. He forced himself to leave it there, but kept his eyes locked on Greg's every movement. The morning sun filtered through the diner's grimy windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Jack sat in his usual booth, his coffee growing cold as he watched Maggie move between tables. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, as if each step required careful thought. The sparkle that had once lit up her eyes, even in the darkest times, had dimmed to barely a flicker. She'd lost weight, too much weight. Her uniform, once snug, now hung loose on her frame. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights, and her hands trembled more than usual as she filled coffee cups and served plates of eggs and toast. Jack's jaw clenched. He'd been patient, maybe too patient. Every day he watched her fade a little more, like a flower wilting in the shadow of Greg's abuse. The bruises might have faded, but the damage went deeper now. He could see it in the way. She flinched at sudden movements, how her eyes constantly darted to the door whenever it opened. During a lull in the breakfast rush, Jack caught her eye and gestured for her to join him. Maggie glanced around nervously before sliding into the booth across from him, her hands fidgeting with her apron. "You're not eating," Jack said quietly, his voice gentle despite the worry etched on his weathered face. "You're not sleeping either." Maggie's lips quivered as she tried to force a smile. I'm fine, Jack, really. No, you're not. He leaned forward, his large frame casting a protective shadow over their table. Look at yourself, Maggie. You're disappearing right in front of me. Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. A customer at another table waved for coffee, but Jack reached across and caught her wrist before she could leave. His touch was light. Careful. We need to talk about this. Now. His voice was firm but kind. It can't wait anymore. Maggie sank back into the booth, her shoulders slumping. She looked so small, so fragile. Nothing like the woman who'd served coffee with a smile just weeks ago. "We're leaving tonight," Jack said, his words quiet but decisive. "I've got everything arranged. A safe place, far from here. You won't have to worry about money or shelter." The color drained from Maggie's already pale face. "Tonight?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. "Tonight," Jack confirmed. "No more waiting. No more excuses." He paused, studying her face. "He's killing you slowly, Maggie. Maybe not with his fists anymore, but with fear, with isolation, with control." Maggie sat in silence, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn tabletop. The weight of the decision pressed down on her like a physical thing. Jack could almost see the thoughts racing behind her eyes: fear for her children, uncertainty about the future, terror of what Greg might do if they failed. She started, then stopped. Her hands trembled as she folded them in her lap. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Jack insisted, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "And you will, because if you don't leave now, you might not get another chance." The diner's bell chimed as new customers entered, breaking the moment. Maggie remained frozen in place, the decision hanging between them like a heavy curtain. Jack waited, patient despite his urgency, giving her the space to find her courage. The diner's neon sign flickered in the growing darkness as Jack waited in his usual booth. His coffee had gone cold, untouched. His weathered hands clasped together on the worn tabletop, knuckles white with tension. Through the window, he watched the last traces of sunlight fade from the sky. Maggie appeared from the kitchen, her apron already removed. Her hands shook as she gathered her purse from behind the counter. The other waitress, Jenny, gave her a quick hug before Maggie made her way to Jack's booth. "I can't," Maggie's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I can't live like this anymore." Her fingers twisted the strap of her purse. "I'm ready, Jack." Jack studied her face, seeing past the bruises to the strength beneath. "You sure about this?" Maggie nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "The kids are at my sister's for the weekend. Greg's passed out at home." She wiped the tear away with trembling fingers. "If we're going to do this, it has to be now." "Let's go, then." Jack stood, leaving a 20 on the table. His movements were deliberate, careful not to startle Maggie, who looked ready to bolt at any sudden motion. They walked to his truck, parked behind the diner, hidden from the main road. Jack had positioned it there earlier, facing the back alley for a quick getaway. The engine rumbled to life, its sound muffled by the crickets chirping in the warm evening air. "We'll get your things first," Jack said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Just what if you need. Nothing more." Maggie clutched her purse tighter. "I packed a bag this morning. It's hidden in the garden shed." They drove in silence to Maggie's house, taking back roads to avoid being seen. Jack killed the engine a block away and walked with her to the shed. His eyes scanned the darkness constantly, muscles tense and ready. The shed door creaked slightly as Maggie retrieved her duffel bag. Jack took it from her, noting how light it was. Her whole life packed into one small bag. His heart ached at the thought. Back in the truck, Maggie sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. As they passed the "Now Leaving" sign at the edge of town, she let out a shaky breath. Her shoulders dropped slightly, some of the tension easing from her frame. Jack glanced at her. In the dim dashboard light, he caught the ghost of a smile on her lips. It was small and uncertain, but it was there. Fear still lingered in her eyes, but something else sparked there too. Hope, maybe. Or the first taste of freedom. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as they headed toward the safe house Jack had arranged. The road stretched empty before them, promising distance from the life Maggie was leaving behind. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was lighter now, filled with possibility rather than dread. Maggie's hand rested on the seat between them, no longer clutching her purse in a death grip. Her breathing had steadied, falling into rhythm with the humming of the engine. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt his own tension begin to ease. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot, but they'd taken the first step. The night wrapped around them like a protective blanket as they drove on, leaving behind the shadows of Maggie's past and moving toward whatever lay ahead. For now, that was enough. The headlights cast long shadows on the empty highway as Jack's truck rumbled through the night. Maggie sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap, occasionally glancing out the window at the passing darkness. The soft hum of the engine and the gentle sway of the vehicle gave them both a momentary sense of peace. Jack checked his mirrors out of habit, something he'd learned during his years with the Angels. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as a flicker of light caught his attention. Far behind them, a pair of headlights appeared, growing larger with each passing second. "Maggie," Jack said, his voice low and controlled. "Is that his truck?" She turned in her seat, her face draining of color as she looked through the rear window. "Yes," she whispered. "That's Greg's pickup." Jack pressed down on the accelerator, and the engine roared in response. The speedometer needle climbed steadily as they raced through the darkness. But the headlights behind them grew brighter, more intense. Greg was gaining on them. "Hold on tight," Jack instructed, his jaw clenched. He knew these roads well, having ridden them countless times on his Harley. The truck wasn't as nimble as his motorcycle, but it was all they had. The distance between the vehicles shortened. Greg's truck loomed in their rearview mirror, its headlights flooding their cab with harsh light. Jack could see Greg's silhouette behind the wheel, hunched forward with determination. "He's not going to let us go," Maggie said, her voice trembling. She gripped the dashboard as Jack took a sharp turn, the tires squealing against the asphalt. Greg's truck swerved closer, the chrome bumper gleaming in their mirrors. He flashed his high beams repeatedly, trying to blind them. Jack squinted against the glare, fighting to keep the truck steady as they rounded another bend. The engine strained as Jack pushed it harder. The familiar landmarks he usually passed at leisurely speeds now blurred past their windows, a sign warning of a steep grade ahead reflected in their headlights. "Jack!" Maggie cried out as Greg's truck suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside them. Through the passenger window, they could see Greg's face contorted with rage, his mouth moving as he shouted words they couldn't hear over the roar of both engines. The trucks raced side by side down the dark highway, neither driver willing to back down. Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he maintained their speed, careful not to let Greg force them off the road. Greg's truck edged closer, threatening to sideswipe them. Metal scraped against metal as the vehicles touched briefly, sending sparks into the night air. Maggie let out a frightened gasp, pressing herself against her door. "We're not stopping," Jack growled, more to himself than to Maggie. He'd spent too many years running from his past to let Greg destroy Maggie's chance at freedom. The truck's engine whined in protest as he pressed the accelerator to the floor. Greg matched their speed, his truck weaving dangerously close. His headlights flashed again and again, creating a strobing effect that made it difficult for Jack to see the road ahead. The tension in the cab was thick enough to cut with a knife as both vehicles hurtled through the darkness, locked in their desperate race. The truck's tires screamed against the pavement as Jack yanked the steering wheel hard, bringing the vehicle to a sudden stop. Gravel crunched beneath the wheels, spraying in all directions. The headlights illuminated a solid brick wall ahead. They'd turned into a dead-end alley. "No, no, no," Maggie whispered, her hands gripping the dashboard. Her knuckles turned white as Greg's truck skidded to a halt behind them, effectively blocking their only escape route. The harsh glare of his headlights filled the cab of their truck, casting long shadows across their faces. Jack's jaw clenched as he watched in the rearview mirror. The engine of Greg's truck rumbled menacingly, like an angry beast waiting to pounce. Maggie's breathing came in short, panicked gasps beside him. "Stay in the truck," Jack ordered, his voice low and steady, despite the gravity of the situation. "Lock the doors behind me." His hand found Maggie's trembling one, giving it a reassuring squeeze before letting go. Through the windshield, they watched Greg stumble out of his truck. Even from this distance, they could see the rage distorting his features. His movements were unsteady. He'd clearly been drinking, but that only made him more dangerous. The streetlight at the end of the alley cast strange shadows across his face, making him look more monster than man. "You think you can take her from me?" Greg's voice boomed off the brick walls of the alley. "She's mine!" He slammed his truck door so hard the entire vehicle shook. Jack took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. The familiar calm of impending confrontation settled over him. A remnant of his past life he never quite shook. He glanced at Maggie one last time. Her eyes were wide with terror, but there was something else there, too, a tiny spark of defiance that hadn't been there before. "Lock the doors," he repeated firmly. Then he opened his door and stepped out into the night. The air was thick with tension as Jack planted his feet firmly on the ground. Greg was about 30 feet away, swaying slightly as he advanced. Jack could smell the alcohol from where he stood. "Walker," Jack's voice carried clearly through the alley. "Turn around and leave. This is your only warning." Greg's laugh was ugly and sharp. "Or what? You gonna stop me, old man?" He took another stumbling step forward. "That's my wife in there. My property." Jack's hands curled into fists at his sides. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready for what was coming. He'd spent years trying to leave violence behind, but sometimes, he knew, it was necessary. Sometimes it was the only language people like Greg understood. "She's not property," Jack growled. "She's a person, and she's done with you." Greg's face twisted with fury. He lurched forward, closing the distance between them. "You don't know anything about us. You think you can just ride in on your motorcycle and play hero?" Behind Jack, he could hear Maggie's muffled sobs from inside the locked truck. The sound hardened his resolve. He widened his stance, preparing for the inevitable. The two men faced each other in the dim alley, the air crackling with tension. Greg's bloodshot eyes darted between Jack and the truck, his hands opening and closing into fists. Jack remained perfectly still, like a mountain waiting for the storm to break. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. There would be no backing down now, no peaceful resolution. Jack could see it in Greg's eyes. This would end in violence. Greg's eyes blazed with fury as he charged forward, moonlight glinting off the knife in his hand. Jack shifted his weight, ready for the attack. His years of experience told him this wouldn't be an easy fight. There was nothing more dangerous than a drunk man with nothing left to lose. "You think you can take her from me?" Greg's voice came out as a growl. His grip on the knife tightened as he slashed wildly through the air. Jack dodged the first swing, feeling the whoosh of the blade pass inches from his face. The second strike came faster, catching his jacket sleeve and tearing through the leather. Behind him, he could hear Maggie's frightened gasp. "Stay in the truck, Maggie," Jack shouted, blocking another of Greg's wild swings with his forearm. The blade caught him this time, drawing blood, but Jack barely felt it. His focus was entirely on the threat before him. Greg pressed forward, his attacks becoming more erratic. "She's mine! You hear me? Mine!" Spittle flew from his mouth as he screamed, his face twisted with rage. Jack managed to grab Greg's knife hand, but Greg's other fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. The taste of copper filled his mouth. Greg followed up with another punch, this one catching Jack in the ribs. The two men grappled, neither willing to give ground. Jack's boots scraped against the gravel as he fought to maintain his balance. Greg might have been drunk, but his anger made him dangerous. The knife flashed again, slicing through the air between them. Jack caught Greg's wrist, trying to force the knife away. But Greg's fury gave him unexpected strength. The blade inched closer to Jack's throat. Sweat beaded on Jack's forehead as he strained against Greg's weight. "You're done hurting her," Jack grunted through clenched teeth. He twisted hard, forcing Greg's arm back, but Greg responded by headbutting him, making Jack's vision blur momentarily. The knife clattered to the ground, but Greg didn't stop. He tackled Jack, both men hitting the dirt hard. They rolled in the gravel, trading punches. Jack could feel his strength starting to fade. The earlier cuts were taking their toll. Greg managed to get on top, his hands wrapping around Jack's throat. "I'll kill you," he snarled, squeezing tighter. "Then I'll teach her what happens when she tries to leave." Jack struggled to break free, but Greg's grip was like iron. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. He could hear Maggie screaming in the background, but it seemed far away. Then suddenly, there was a solid thunk, and Greg's eyes went wide. His grip loosened, and he slumped forward. Behind him stood Maggie, her hands shaking. A large rock clutched in her grip. Her face was pale, but her eyes showed a determination Jack had never seen before. "Get up," she said urgently, dropping the rock. "We need to go. Now." Jack scrambled to his feet, his throat burning as he sucked in air. Greg lay unconscious on the ground, blood trickling from where the rock had struck him. Without wasting another moment, Jack grabbed Maggie's hand, and they ran back to the truck. They jumped in, and Jack turned the key. The engine roared to life, and he threw the truck into reverse, tires spinning on the gravel. As they sped away, he could see Greg's crumpled form in the rearview mirror, still motionless on the ground. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as Jack steered them away from the scene of the fight. His hands gripped the wheel tight, knuckles white and bloodied. Every few seconds, he glanced in the rearview mirror, making sure Greg's truck wasn't following them. Maggie sat beside him, trembling. Her fingers clutched the dashboard, and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The rock she'd used to save them both lay forgotten at her feet, a dark reminder of what they'd just survived. "You okay?" Jack's gruff voice broke the silence. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye where Greg's knife had grazed him. I think so," Maggie whispered. She turned to look at him, her eyes wide with concern. "You're bleeding, Jack." "It's nothing." He pressed his sleeve against the cut, wincing slightly. "We've got about 20 minutes till we reach the safe house. Just hang in there." The truck bumped along back roads, avoiding the main highway. Jack had planned this route carefully, choosing the least traveled paths through dense woods and abandoned farm lanes. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light through the trees. Maggie's hands shook as she dug through her purse, pulling out a clean tissue. "Here," she said, reaching over to dab at Jack's wound. "Let me help." He didn't pull away, letting her tend to him as he drove. The simple act of caring for someone else seemed to steady her nerves. Her breathing slowly returned to normal. "I can't believe I hit him," she said softly, pressing the tissue against Jack's cut. I've never hurt anyone before." "You did what you had to do," Jack replied, his voice gentle. "You saved us both back there." Trees gave way to open fields as they turned onto a narrow dirt road. An old farmhouse appeared in the distance, its weathered boards barely visible in the darkness. Jack slowed the truck. scanning the area before pulling up to the house. "This is it?" Maggie asked, peering through the windshield. "Yeah. Owner's a friend who owes me a favor. No one's lived here for years, but it's solid. Got everything we need inside." They sat in the truck for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The night was quiet except for the chirp of crickets and the rustle of wind through the trees. No headlights appeared on the road behind them. No angry shouts broke the peace. Jack got out first, checking the surroundings before helping Maggie from the passenger seat. They walked to the front door, their footsteps crunching on gravel. Jack's hand stayed at the small of her back, guiding and protecting. The key was right where it should be, hidden under a loose board on the porch. Jack unlocked the door and ushered Maggie inside, quickly following and securing every lock. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood. Maggie stood in the middle of the living room, arms wrapped around herself, taking in the shelter that would be her temporary home. A couch sat against one wall, covered with a sheet. A kitchen table with 4 chairs stood in the next room. Simple, but safe. For the first time since they'd left town, Maggie took a deep, full breath. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she turned to Jack with tears in her eyes. "We made it," she whispered, her voice catching. "We actually made it." Jack nodded, leaning against the wall, finally allowing himself to feel the exhaustion and pain from the fight. They were safe, at least for now. In this quiet moment, that was enough. The morning sun filtered through dusty curtains, casting long shadows across the safe house's worn wooden floor. Jack sat in an old armchair, his bandaged arm resting on the side table. The cut from Greg's knife hadn't been deep enough for stitches, but it still burned like fire whenever he moved. Maggie walked into the small living room carrying a fresh cup of coffee. Her hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in years. "Here," she said softly, placing the mug next to him. "Be careful. It's hot." Jack nodded, his gruff exterior softening slightly as he watched her settle into the chair across from him. The past few days had been quiet, filled with careful movements and whispered conversations. The safe house, though modest, felt like a fortress against the outside world. "How's the arm feeling today?" Maggie asked, her eyes full of concern. "Better," Jack replied, flexing his fingers slowly. "Don't worry about me. I've had worse." Maggie shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "You're a terrible patient. You know that? Always trying to act tough." The afternoon light grew warmer as they sat together. Maggie had been busy, making the safe house feel more like a home. She'd cleaned every surface, arranged the few belongings they'd managed to grab, and even found some old curtains in a closet to hang. "I used to dream about having a little house like this," Maggie said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "When I was a girl, my grandmother had this cottage by the lake. Everything was simple there, just peace and quiet." Her eyes grew distant with the memory. "We'd spend summer evenings on the porch, watching fireflies. She taught me how to make strawberry jam and told me stories about when she was young." Jack listened intently, seeing a new side of Maggie emerge. She rarely talked about her past, but now the words seemed to flow naturally. "What happened to the cottage?" Jack asked softly. "Sold after Grandma passed." Maggie's smile turned wistful. "I was 16. That's when everything started changing. Met Greg a year later, thought he was my ticket to happiness." She paused, running her fingers along the arm of her chair. "Funny how life turns out so different from what you expect." Jack shifted in his seat, wincing slightly at the movement. "What do you want now? For your future?" Maggie looked up, surprised by the question. Nobody had asked her that in years. "I want," she started, then took a deep breath. "I want peace. Maybe a little garden where I can grow tomatoes. A job where I don't have to look over my shoulder. Simple things." The afternoon drifted into evening as they talked. Maggie shared stories about her childhood, about the dreams she'd tucked away for so long. With each memory she shared, her voice grew stronger, more confident. As the sun began to set, casting orange light through the windows, Maggie turned to Jack with tears in her eyes. "I never properly thanked you," she said quietly, "for everything you've done, for saving me." Jack's weathered face softened. "You saved yourself, Maggie. I just helped clear the path a little." "Still," she insisted, "you risked everything for me. Not many people would do that." The room grew quiet again, but it was a comfortable silence. Outside, birds called their evening songs, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. For the first time in years, Maggie felt the weight of fear lifting from her shoulders, replaced by something that felt surprisingly like hope. The morning sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the safe house, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Jack sat at the small kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he watched Maggie pack her few belongings into a cardboard box. "I found a place," Maggie said, carefully folding a sweater. "It's a small town about 3 hours north. Nobody knows me there." Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "They're looking for someone to help run their local library." Jack nodded, his fingers absently tracing the healing cut on his forearm. The wound from their escape was starting to fade, but the memory remained sharp and clear. "Sounds perfect for you," he said, his voice gravelly from lack of sleep. Maggie paused in her packing, turning to face him. "You don't have to worry about me anymore, Jack. I'll be okay." She offered him a small smile, but he could see the concern in her eyes. "What about you? What will you do?" Jack shifted in his chair, wincing slightly at the lingering pain in his ribs. "I'll keep moving. That's what I do best." He tried to sound casual, but the weight of their shared experience hung heavy between them. "You saved my life," Maggie said quietly, sitting down across from him. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." "Live it," Jack replied simply. "That's all the payment I need." They spent the morning making preparations. Jack helped Maggie load her boxes into his truck, each movement careful and deliberate. The safe house had served its purpose, but it was time to move on. The drive north was quiet, broken only by the steady hum of the engine and occasional directions from Maggie. Jack kept checking the rear-view mirror out of habit, but there was no sign of pursuit. Greg was long gone, probably still nursing his wounds and his wounded pride. The small town appeared on the horizon, its church steeple piercing the sky like a needle. Main Street was lined with maple trees, their leaves just starting to turn golden in the early fall air. Jack pulled up in front of a modest apartment building, its red brick facade warm and inviting. "This is it," Maggie said, her voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. "My new home." They unloaded the boxes together, carrying them up to the second-floor apartment. The space was small but bright, with large windows overlooking the town square. Maggie moved around the room, touching things tentatively, as if afraid they might disappear. "The library's just 2 blocks away," she said, pointing out the window. "I start next week." Jack stood in the doorway, watching as she began to unpack. There was a lightness to her movements now, a freedom he hadn't seen before. The bruises had faded, and though the emotional scars would take longer to heal, he could see the strength returning to her eyes. "Thank you," she said suddenly, turning to face him. "Not just for saving me, but for showing me I was worth saving." Jack felt something catch in his throat. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. "You always were, Maggie. You just needed to remember it." Through the window, the afternoon sun painted the room in warm golden light. Maggie stood in its glow, and for the first time since Jack had known her, she smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes and lit up her whole face. It was the smile of someone who finally... The small bell above the door chimed as Jack stepped into Martha's Flowers. The sweet scent of roses and lilies filled the air, and sunlight streamed through the large front windows. Maggie stood behind the counter, carefully arranging yellow daisies in a crystal vase. Her movements were steady now, without the trembling that had haunted her for so long. "Good morning, Jack," she said, looking up with a genuine smile. The bruises had faded completely, and there was a newfound confidence in her posture. "Morning, Maggie?" Jack's heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor as he approached the counter. "How's the new job treating you?" Maggie's eyes lit up as she adjusted a daisy. "Martha's been teaching me everything about flowers. Did you know each one has its own meaning?" She pointed to the daisies. "These represent innocence and new beginnings." Jack nodded, watching her work. The old Maggie would have kept her eyes down, her voice barely above a whisper. But now she moved with purpose, her head held high. "The regulars love her," Martha called from the back room. The shop owner, a woman in her 70s with silver hair, emerged carrying a box of ribbons. "She's got a natural talent for arrangements." Maggie's cheeks flushed at the praise. "I never thought I'd enjoy working with flowers so much." She finished the arrangement and stepped back to admire it. "It feels good to create something beautiful." Jack leaned against the counter, his leather jacket creaking. "You seem happy here." "I am." Maggie began sorting through a fresh delivery of carnations. "You know, I've been thinking." She paused, then continued with growing excitement. "Maybe someday I could have my own shop. Nothing fancy, just a small place where people could find beautiful flowers for special moments in their lives." The hope in her voice made Jack's chest tighten. This was the woman who, just months ago, couldn't imagine a future beyond her next sunrise. "You'd be good at that," he said softly. "You really think so?" Maggie asked, her eyes searching his face. "I know so." Jack straightened up. "You've got the eye for it, and you understand what people need. That's half the battle right there." Martha nodded in agreement as she arranged some potted plants in the window. "She's already got quite a following. Mrs. Peterson won't let anyone else do her weekly arrangements." Maggie brushed some loose petals from the counter, her movements confident and sure. "It feels strange sometimes," she admitted. "Having dreams again, making plans. But good strange, you know." Jack understood. He'd seen her transform from a frightened woman into someone who dared to hope again. "Nothing strange about it at all," he said. "You're just getting back to who you always were." Maggie smiled, this time with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Jack, for everything, for believing in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself." A customer entered the shop, and Maggie turned to help them, her voice warm and professional as she discussed flower options. Jack watched her work, saw how naturally she moved through this new life she was building. The woman before him wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Maggie caught his eye between helping customers and gave him a quick wink. Her smile was real, reaching all the way to her eyes. She belonged here, among the flowers and sunshine, creating beauty where once there had only been darkness. The morning sun streamed through the flower shop's windows, catching the colorful petals of roses and daisies. Maggie hummed softly as she arranged a bouquet of pink carnations, her hands steady and sure. The sweet scent of fresh flowers filled the air, bringing a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The phone's sharp ring cut through her calm. Maggie wiped her hands on her apron and reached for it. "Bloom and Grow Flower Shop? How can I help you? Mom?" Her daughter Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. Maggie's heart skipped a beat. "Sarah? What's wrong, honey?" "They arrested him, Mom. Dad. Greg. He's in jail." Sarah's words tumbled out in a rush. "He showed up at Mike's house, drunk and angry, looking for you. But Mike called the police this time. They found drugs in his truck, and with his previous record." She paused, catching her breath. "He's going away for a long time." Maggie's legs went weak. She sank into the chair behind the counter, her free hand pressed against her chest. "Are you okay? Did he hurt anyone?" "We're fine, Mom. Everyone's fine." Sarah's voice softened. "But Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry we didn't believe you sooner. We should have helped you leave years ago." Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes. The guilt she'd been carrying since she left, the weight of abandoning her children, pressed down on her chest. "I'm the one who should be sorry. I should have been stronger, should have protected you all better. No, Mom, you did what you had to do to survive." Sarah's words were firm. "We understand now. Mike and I both do." The bell above the shop door chimed. Jack walked in, his familiar presence bringing comfort. He took one look at Maggie's face and knew something was wrong. "Sarah, I need to go," Maggie said, her voice trembling. "I love you, honey." "Love you too, Mom." Maggie set the phone down and looked up at Jack. "Greg's been arrested." The words felt strange in her mouth. "He went looking for me at my son's house. They found drugs in his truck." Jack pulled up a chair and sat across from her. His weathered face showed concern. "How are you feeling about that?" "I don't know." Maggie wrapped her arms around herself. "Relieved, I guess. But there's this guilt. I left them behind, Jack. I ran away and left my children to deal with him. You didn't leave them behind." Jack's voice was gentle but firm. "You saved yourself so you could be there for them now. Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do." Sarah said they understand now. Maggie wiped at her eyes. "But all those years—" "Listen to me." Jack leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You did the right thing. Your kids are safe now. You're safe now. That's what matters." Maggie nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. The guilt was still there, but it felt lighter somehow. Through the window, she could see the street outside. Ordinary people going about their day, the sun shining, life moving forward. For the first time, she truly believed she could move forward too. "Thank you, Jack," she whispered, "for everything." He just nodded, understanding in his eyes. Together they sat in the quiet flower shop, surrounded by the beauty of new beginnings. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Maggie's small apartment above the flower shop. She stood before her mirror, adjusting her blouse and studying her reflection. The bruises had long since faded, but more importantly, the fear in her eyes was gone. In its place was a quiet determination, a spark that grew brighter with each passing day. Downstairs, the bell above the shop door chimed as Mrs. Peterson, one of her regular customers, entered. "Good morning, Maggie," the elderly woman called out cheerfully. "Morning, Helen," Maggie replied warmly, descending the stairs. "How are those tulips holding up?" "Beautiful as ever. You certainly have a gift." Mrs. Peterson browsed the fresh arrangements. "I'm hosting the garden club meeting next week. Would you help me put together something special?" Maggie's face lit up. "I'd love to." She guided Mrs. Peterson through the shop, discussing colors and flower combinations. Her confidence showed in the way she moved, in how she spoke about her craft with genuine enthusiasm. Later that morning, Sarah from the bakery next door stopped by with fresh muffins. "Thought you might need a pick-me-up," she said, placing the paper bag on the counter. "You're an angel," Maggie smiled, pulling out a still warm blueberry muffin. These small gestures of friendship meant everything to her now. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have people in her life who genuinely cared, who didn't want anything in return except her friendship. Throughout the day, Maggie worked with an easy grace, creating arrangements for upcoming weddings and special occasions. Her hands moved surely among the flowers, no longer shaking when the bell rang or when unfamiliar customers entered the shop. During the afternoon lull, she sat with Jenny, her young assistant, teaching her how to create a perfect rose bouquet. "It's all about balance," she explained, demonstrating the technique. "Each flower needs room to breathe, to show its beauty." Jenny watched in admiration. "You make it look so easy, Maggie." Practice, Maggie replied with a gentle smile, and believing in yourself. The words struck her as she said them. How long had it been since she'd truly believed in herself? It had come in small steps, first accepting help from Jack, then finding the courage to start over, and finally allowing herself to trust others again. As the afternoon sun began to slant through the windows, casting long shadows across the shop floor, Jack's familiar figure appeared in the doorway. He stood quietly, watching as Maggie helped a young couple choose flowers for their anniversary. Her eyes sparkled as she described different arrangements, suggesting combinations that would complement their home. Her genuine warmth drew people in, made them feel at ease. It was a far cry from the frightened woman who had once flinched at sudden movements and avoided eye contact. The couple left with a beautiful arrangement of lilies and roses, and Maggie finally noticed Jack's presence. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked, smiling. "Long enough to see you working your magic," he replied, his gruff voice carrying a note of pride. Maggie moved among her flowers, adjusting displays and tidying stems. Her movements were fluid, purposeful. She belonged here, among these beautiful, delicate things that she helped arrange into something even more beautiful. Each bouquet was a testament to her creativity, her strength, her ability to create beauty. Even after experiencing so much ugliness, the flower shop had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of her transformation. Here, surrounded by the sweet scent of fresh blooms and the warmth of new friendships, Maggie had found her true self again. The early morning sun filtered through Jack's motel room window, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. He sat in his usual spot, a weathered armchair by the window, nursing a cup of black coffee. His leather jacket hung on a hook nearby, a reminder of his past life that seemed more distant with each passing day. Jack ran his calloused hand over his beard, feeling the gray strands that had multiplied over the years. The quiet moments like these used to be filled with restlessness, an itch to get back on his bike and ride away from whatever demons were chasing him. But something had changed. He thought about Maggie, about how helping her had shifted something inside him. The weight of his past, the violence, the chaos of his years with the angels felt lighter somehow. Not gone, but different, like old scars that had finally healed properly. Through the window, he watched people starting their day. A mother walking her kids to school, an old man sweeping his storefront. Normal life, the kind of life he'd always viewed from the outside, like watching a movie he wasn't part of. Now, for the first time in decades, he felt a connection to it all. His coffee had gone cold by the time he decided to head to Maggie's shop. The small bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the sweet scent of flowers wrapped around him. Maggie was arranging roses in a crystal vase, her movements confident and peaceful. When she looked up, her smile was genuine, no trace of the fear that used to shadow her face. "Jack," she said warmly, setting down her scissors, "I was hoping you'd stop by today." The shop was exactly what Maggie had dreamed of. Bright, welcoming, filled with life. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, making the fresh-cut flowers glow. A few regular customers browsed the arrangements, nodding hello to Jack. They knew him now, not as the intimidating ex-biker, but as Maggie's friend. "Place looks good," Jack said, his gruff voice softer than usual. "You've really made it your own." Maggie wiped her hands on her apron and came around the counter. "Thanks to you," she said quietly. "I never would have had the courage without your help." Jack shifted uncomfortably, still not used to gratitude. "You had the courage all along, just needed someone to remind you." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both understanding that this visit was different. Jack had decided it was time to move on, to let Maggie fully embrace her new life without any reminders of the past, even good ones. You're leaving, aren't you? Maggie asked, reading his expression. Jack nodded slowly. Time to hit the road again? Maggie touched his arm gently, and he didn't flinch away like he once would have. You've changed my life, Jack Turner. I want you to know that. You changed mine, too, he admitted, surprising himself with the words, showed me there's still good things worth fighting for. A customer called for Maggie's attention, and she squeezed Jack's arm one last time before turning away. Jack watched her move confidently through her shop, stopping to help customers, arranging flowers with sure hands. She was whole again, maybe stronger than before. He felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in his life, he'd been part of something purely good. He'd helped someone find their way back to the light, and somehow, in doing so, he'd found his own way, too. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Jack's weathered leather jacket as he packed the last of his belongings onto his Harley. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if trying to stretch out these final moments in town. The chrome of his bike gleamed, reflecting the early light, much like the new beginning that lay ahead of him. He couldn't help but smile, remembering the frightened woman he'd first met at the diner all those months ago. Maggie wasn't that person anymore. She'd grown stronger, braver, more sure of herself with each passing day. Her flower shop was thriving, and so was she. Jack kicked his motorcycle stand up and guided his bike through the quiet streets. The rumble of the engine echoed off the storefronts, a sound that had once struck fear in people's hearts during his Hell's Angels days. Now it was just the sound of a man moving forward, leaving the past where it belonged. The flower shop came into view, its windows bright with colorful bouquets. Maggie was already there, arranging fresh flowers in the display. She looked up at the sound of his approach, and her face broke into a warm smile, the kind that reached her eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. Jack parked his bike and walked to the shop's entrance. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside, bringing with it the sweet scent of roses and lilies. "So, you're really leaving?" Maggie asked, setting down a bunch of daisies she'd been organizing. "Yeah," Jack nodded, his voice gruff with emotion. "It's time." Maggie wiped her hands on her apron and came around the counter. "I don't know how to thank you, Jack, for everything." "You already have," he replied, gesturing to the shop around them. "Look at what you've built here. Look at how far you've come." Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear like before. These were different. They held gratitude, strength, and hope. "You gave me back my life," she said softly. "You helped me find my courage when I thought I'd lost it forever." Jack shuffled his feet, uncomfortable with the praise. "You always had it in you, Maggie. You just needed someone to remind you." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. Jack stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, patting her back awkwardly. This wasn't the trembling woman who'd once flinched at every sudden movement. This was someone who'd reclaimed her power, who stood tall and proud. "Where will you go?" she asked, stepping back. "Wherever the road takes me," he shrugged. "Maybe find someone else who needs help." Maggie smiled knowingly. "You can't help yourself, can you? Always looking out for others. Old habits," he said with a small grin. They walked together to his motorcycle. The morning sun had risen higher now, casting long shadows across the street. Jack swung his leg over the bike and settled into the familiar leather seat. "Take care of yourself, Maggie," he said, starting the engine. "You too, Jack," she replied, her voice strong and clear over the rumble of the motorcycle. As he pulled away from the curb, Jack glanced in his rearview mirror. Maggie stood in front of her shop, one hand raised in farewell. The sun caught her face, highlighting the confidence in her stance, the peace in her expression. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Jack smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. The road stretched out before him, full of possibilities. But he knew he'd never forget the woman who'd helped him find his own kind of redemption. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Maggie's blooms, casting warm light on the freshly arranged flowers. Maggie stood behind the counter, carefully wrapping a bouquet of pink roses for a customer. Her hands moved with confidence now, no longer trembling like they used to. "These are perfect for my daughter's graduation," the customer said, smiling as she accepted the wrapped flowers. "Thank you for choosing us," Maggie replied, her voice steady and warm. The bell above the door chimed as the customer left, leaving behind the sweet scent of roses and satisfaction. Maggie looked around her shop with pride. The walls were painted a soft sage green, and wooden shelves held an array of colorful blooms. Fresh buckets of flowers lined the walls: daisies, lilies, carnations, and more. The morning light made everything glow, and the peaceful atmosphere was exactly what she'd always dreamed of creating. She walked over to a display of sunflowers, adjusting their position slightly. These had always been her favorites, their bright faces following the sun, standing tall and strong. Sometimes she felt like those sunflowers now, no longer hiding in shadows but turning toward the light. The shop had been open for 3 months, and already it had become a neighborhood favorite. Local customers came in regularly, not just for flowers, but also for conversation. Maggie found herself sharing gardening tips, discussing flower meanings, and sometimes just listening to people's stories. It was healing in its own way. As she worked on inventory at the counter, the mail carrier pushed letters through the mail slot. Maggie gathered them up, mostly bills and advertisements, but one envelope caught her eye. The handwriting was familiar, rough and determined, just like its sender. She sat down on the stool behind the counter, her heart beating a little faster as she opened the letter from Jack. The paper was simple, but the words were anything but. "Remember that morning when you first told me about wanting to open a flower shop? You didn't think it was possible then. But I knew. I could see the strength in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself. I want to thank you for letting me help. Truth is, you helped me too. For years I carried the weight of my past, thinking I could never make up for the things I'd done. But seeing you rebuild your life, watching you grow stronger each day, it gave me something I didn't know I was looking for. Peace, maybe. I heard through the grapevine that your shop is doing well. I'm not surprised. You always had it in you, Maggie. All you needed was a chance to bloom. Take care of yourself, Jack." Maggie touched the letter gently, a smile spreading across her face. She looked around her shop again, seeing it through new eyes. The fresh flowers, the sunny windows, the peaceful atmosphere, it was more than just a business. It was proof that she had survived, that she had rebuilt herself from the ground up. She carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her apron pocket. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, warming her face as she went back to work, arranging flowers with steady hands and a peaceful heart. Each stem she touched was a reminder of how far she'd come, and each bloom represented the beauty that could grow from even the darkest places. The evening sun painted the street in warm golden hues as Maggie Walker stood by the front window of her flower shop. She wiped her hands on her green apron, taking in the peaceful scene before her. The Walker's Flowers sign cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the fresh bouquets in the display window filled the air with sweet fragrance. Inside the shop, everything was in perfect order, just the way she liked it. Roses, daisies, and lilies lined the shelves in colorful arrays, their petals catching the last rays of sunlight. The wooden floors gleamed from their recent cleaning, and the brass bell above the door sparkled. Maggie touched the window frame lightly, remembering how far she'd come. The bruises had long since faded, but sometimes she could still feel phantom aches where Greg's anger had left its marks. Those memories didn't frighten her anymore. They reminded her of her strength, of how she'd survived and grown stronger. She thought about the day's sales as she straightened a vase of sunflowers. 3 wedding consultations, 2 sympathy arrangements, and countless walk-in customers had kept her busy. The register drawer was full, and her appointment book for next week was filling up quickly. Success tasted sweet, like the honey she stirred into her morning tea. The sound of a motorcycle engine rumbled in the distance. Maggie's heart skipped a beat. She knew that sound. Sure enough, Jack's familiar figure appeared on his Harley, moving slowly down the street. His leather jacket caught the light, and his long hair streamed behind him. A smile spread across her face as she watched him approach. He looked different now, more at peace, just like her. The weight of protecting her no longer burdened his shoulders. She could see it in the way he sat straighter on his bike, in the casual tilt of his head as he rode. Through the window, their eyes met. Jack's weathered face broke into a gentle smile. Not the guarded expression he'd worn when they first met at the diner, but something warmer, more genuine. He lifted one hand from the handlebar in a wave. Maggie waved back, her heart full of gratitude. Without Jack, she might still be trapped in that cycle of fear and pain. He'd shown her what real strength looked like, not through violence, but through unwavering support and belief in her worth. The last rays of sunlight caught the silver in Jack's hair as he passed by, making it shine like a halo. His motorcycle's rumble faded slowly, like thunder rolling away after a storm. Maggie kept waving until he disappeared around the corner, knowing this might be the last time she saw him. But that was okay. They'd both found what they needed. She had her freedom and her shop, and Jack had found his redemption. Sometimes the best endings weren't really endings at all, but new beginnings in disguise. Maggie turned back to her flowers, breathing in their sweet scent. The shop bell tinkled as a late customer walked in, and she straightened her apron, ready to help. This was her life now, peaceful, purposeful, and entirely her own. Just as the sun was setting on another day, she knew tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new flowers to arrange, and new reasons to smile. The shop window reflected her image back at her. A strong woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, like a flower pushing through concrete to reach the light. And somewhere out there, Jack was riding into his own sunset, carrying with him the knowledge that he'd helped make this possible.